Hey everybody, it's Anthony from Gravitee, and I'm here to tell you about the introduction of the OpenTelemetry feature in Gravitee API Management version 4.6, which is coming out in January of 2025. And in this video, I'm going to talk through a scenario and show how OpenTelemetry can be used to support this scenario. So what we're going to do here is we are going to have a client API in Gravitee that we're going to call. And the purpose of this client API is to obtain a OAuth token from an OAuth server, which in this case is Gravitee Access Management. One of the great things about working at Gravitee is whenever you need an OAuth token, you can use Access Management to get one. So we'll get that OAuth token via an HTTP callout policy, and then we will use that to call the target API that has an OAuth plan on top of it. And then that target API is going to proxy requests to two different endpoints via a load balancer. One of these endpoints is going to be a real target endpoint, and the other is going to be not real. So it's going to return a 500 because the host name is not going to be correct. Now, in a real life scenario, this is a pretty common scenario we see with Gravitee users. And in a real life scenario, there are a lot of places where this can go wrong. So there's at least 3. And if you are on the client side, you might not really know if you get an error back, where did this go wrong? And if you're on the operations side and someone comes to you and says, hey, there was a problem with my request, there's a ton of places where this could go wrong. And you have no easy way to find out where this does go wrong. And the good news is when you add OpenTelemetry support to your API, you can trace the entire request through the network stack and see everything that happens. Gravitee generates the OpenTelemetry spans and then exports them to the OpenTelemetry collector that you use. And then you can use your visualization tool of choice to find out what happened to this request. In this demo, we're going to use Jaeger as the visualization tool, but you can use anyone that supports the OpenTelemetry protocol. So that's the scenario. Now let's dive into the demo. So on the first side, we have the OpenTelemetry client. This is the client API that's going to issue an HTTP callout request to Gravitee Access Management to get the access token. Then it's going to add that access token to as the authorization header using the response that it got from the HTTP callout policy. Then in this endpoint here, it's going to call the upstream. It's going to call the upstream target API that is the OTel target. And that's this API over here, the OpenTelemetry target. And this has 2 endpoints that it's proxying. The first is the what time is it API, which is a Gravitee Echo API. And then we also have one here that's not a real endpoint. So this is going to call some random string of URL that I typed in here that won't be able to resolve. And on top of this API, we have an OAuth plan. And this is going to use access management, and it's going to check the bearer token that it gets against the configured OAuth resource. And it's going to check if that token is valid or not. And if it does, it will allow the request. And if it doesn't, it will not. For each of these APIs, we've enabled the OpenTelemetry support. So here we have in the API traffic section, we have a new option here at the bottom, OpenTelemetry. And in this case, it's enabled on the target API here. And so this is going to introduce its own entry into the span of a network request. And here, it's going to be the same thing over here. So we're going to go down to the OpenTelemetry settings and see that the OpenTelemetry is enabled. There is a configuration to turn on OpenTelemetry and the OpenTelemetry exporter in the Gravitee gateway that you can configure at the gateway level. And we have documentation as part of the release of how to do that. So let's get back to the demo. In this case, we're still on the client side. We're going to issue an HTTP callout and add that response token to the headers, and we'll see how it goes. So let's open up our terminal here, and let's go ahead and run the HTTP GET request. We're going to use HTTP. We're going to call the gateway URL AG OTel client, run that, and we're going to get back an internal server error in this case because we're load balancing between the two. And in this case, we're going to call it again, and we're going to get the positive response. So this is the response from the upstream endpoint where the response was good. This is the response. For when the upstream endpoint was bad. Now, if you're a client and you get this response back, you might have no idea what happened. So you can send, as an administrator, you can then say, well, how do I find out what happened? Well, with the OpenTelemetry data, we've now exported this here. And if we go over to Jaeger and look at the traces, we can look at these two requests and see what happened. So here we can see, oh, there's a bunch of spans here. And if I click on that, I can actually see detailed request information about everything that happened here. So I can see, okay, the request came into the Gravitee gateway. The HTTP callout policy happened, no error there. The endpoint invoker to the upstream endpoint happened. Issue the GET request. Then we go to the target and looks like there's an error within this span. And then we scroll down here, we can see, oh, here's where it actually went wrong. And if I drag this down, I can see the stack trace saying, hey, unknown host exception failed to resolve this issue here. So we can see, okay, this all went wrong. Something happened with the request. Whereas if I go back to the one that worked, I can see here, okay, everything went through this to the endpoint, got a nice response, HTTP status 200, everything's great. So that's the first scenario where something went wrong. If we go back to our diagram here, the problem really happened here in this part of the request. So that's an example of when the error happens here on this part of the network connection. How would we know, however, how to troubleshoot a case where getting the token from the OAuth server failed? Well, to show that, let's go ahead and make that happen. So let's go over to the policies section here. And in the HTTP callout, we've gone ahead and put the credentials base64 encoded here to call out to Gravitee AM. Let's go ahead and remove that. And by the way, in APIM 4.6, you can now take this value out of the API definition with secrets managers, which we'll talk about in another video. Let's go ahead and say that that's not going to work. So we'll go ahead and save that, deploy the API. And now if we go over and make a request, we're going to see, oh, I got this 500 request is terminated. Where did that come from? I don't know. It looks pretty similar to this internal server error. Well, on the administrative side, you can go ahead and look for your traces here. You'll see, okay, get OTel client. There's already a tip that it didn't go to the backend because there's not this second span here. If I come down and look here, I see, okay, here's an error. I come look at the client. And when I come down here, I see, oh, this failed. Oh, it's giving me an error because the request was terminated from the HTTP callout. Something must have happened there. So we can see now that the problem is actually in the HTTP callout policy. And we actually know where to look. And we can come in here and we can say, oh, this is what happened. Let's go ahead and fix that. So when we do that, we'll fix it up, save it, and go ahead and deploy the API. And if we do that again, now different error, we could go and look at that. So let's say, oh, we're back to normal here. What happened with this one? Let's go look at that trace again. Find those traces. Oh, this one has some errors. We come down here and say, oh, the error was here, and this is our unknown host name again. So that's how you can use the OpenTelemetry integration in Gravitee 4.6 to trace network requests and better troubleshoot your API management environment. Thanks.